I got it. I got all the buttons. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Star Trek Discovery Pod. Star date. I'm doing it all backwards tonight. 05262022. This is Star Trek Discovery Pod. Sometimes smart, not tonight. The smarts have left the building. Kind of funny podcast about new and classic Star Trek. I'm your captain for this evening, Mariah Gossett. And with me on the view screen, we have
Clyde Haynes.
Kelas Lloyd.
Welcome, Kelas. We're so excited to have you join us this evening. You are our guest for the night. Kelas is a disabled author, artist, science fiction enthusiast who is always interested in discussing disability in media. You can find them on Twitter at, is there a pronunciation of your at?
Tedon de Deer.
Tedon de Deer. All right.
Yeah, I wouldn't have gotten that one.
I know. I was about to just spell it, but it's on the screen if you are watching us live, which I hope you are. If you're tuning in to the audio podcast, you can find links to follow them on the show description. We're so excited to have you, Kelas. And before we kind of dive into it, I would love to ask you a little bit about your fan history, your first Trek memory, maybe, and tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
Okay, so my first Trek memory is actually the premiere of The Next Generation. Dad sat me down with it because he was excited. He was a fan of the classic series. And he had me, as the ship zoomed across the screen, he had me dodging it. And we continued that tradition throughout the run of TNG because I was small and very easily amused.
That sounds fun. Is it like, do you remember at movie theaters where there was like the fake roller coaster? If you went to like a Regal Cinemas and you'd all like do like you're in the fake pod.
yeah, we were dodging and yep, exactly.
Super fun. Can you tell us a little bit about your writing and where people can find that?
Yeah, I write sci-fi and fantasy, speculative literature, basically. I have my publications are actually still forthcoming, but I have sold stories. I'm going to have a short story in Shacklebound Books' Worms Anthology, and when ATB Publications puts out their Deep Space Nine essay anthology, I have an essay in there on Melora, the episode about the alien who was disabled because of low gravity.
Amazing. That's so exciting. Well, yeah, we will definitely retweet. Let us know when that comes out because that sounds really exciting. I know we've got quite a few Deep Space Nine fans in our community. And I also enjoy Deep Space Nine, so I'm excited to check that out. But there are a few things, housekeeping things. Clyde, can you tell people how they can interact with us tonight during the live stream?
Well, if you're live with us on YouTube or wherever you watch us live, then you can simply just chat with us by, if you want us to see what you're writing, comment on it, then just type capital P, capital O, capital D, capital pod in the chat. And we'll take a look at your comment. Now, if you happen to have a particular interesting take on the show, and when we get to that part, you'll know what we're talking about. Then we just ask that you type capital H, capital F, capital HF before your take, and we will take a look.
Amazing. Yes. And you can find links to all of our Patreons, how to join us on Slack. You can find links to all our social media at StarTrekPod.co. All right. Are you guys ready? Let's start this hunt for the red Gorntober, if you will. I'm sorry. I really tried to do a Sean Connery accent and that did not work out at all for me. Because I got stuck on Gorntober, because you got to do that oct when it's Sean Connery, the hunt for the red October. This week's episode is entitled Memento Mori. It was directed by Dan Liu, written by Davey Perez and Bao de Mayo. And I think we're getting ready to perhaps have some of those. Hot freaks! Hot freaks! Some hot freaks. All right, y'all. Who wants to go first? Who's got a hot freak they'd like to share with us tonight? Clyde, do you want to jump in?
Sure, I'll jump in.
Yeah.
So most of you know that we got 5 episode screeners in advance. And so while I couldn't tell anyone what I had seen, I got a lot of people asking me, what did you think? And early on, I kept telling everybody, I'm really excited. I said, it's really good. But the 4th episode is one of my favorite episodes of all time. And they were like, really? It's like, no, listen to me. The series I'm all for, but the fourth episode. So I've been waiting for everyone else to catch up to this episode because I loved it. Mariah, you know how much I love space fighting, right?
So much
ship to
space
ship
fighting.
comms. There was so much ship to ship combat. We got a pike maneuver. There was mystery. The Gorn. I mean, we always talk about having a really good villain, having someone that is compelling and interesting. And kudos to the Star Trek team again for giving us something that is not only super rooted in canon, but we know so very little about. So I'm intrigued and excited. And so again, when we get this, this episode, not this episode, this series does a really good job of marrying the episodic approach with this character driven narrative. And so I feel like I keep getting to know more and more, whether it's about Himmer or Uhura. And I mean, what they're doing with the Uhura character is phenomenal. I mean, I'm just hats off to the team of giving this. I show up every Thursday excited. And I've seen the first 5 episodes. Like, this is the first thing I'm trying to watch every day, and I've already seen it. So again, I'm loving it.
Amazing. How about you, Keelis?
I think a lot of episodic Star Trek has trouble creating tension through the episode because you don't know that anything will carry over. I think this episode did that really well. You could feel the pressure, you could feel the danger, you could feel the weight of La'an's background pressing in and what she knew and how she was fighting through it to communicate effectively what the threat was, where the danger was, and how to deal with it. It was really good, and I like the fact that they allowed her to be traumatized without lingering on it. It was clear she was traumatized. It was clear she has some work to do there, but she also made some steps to get through it, and I appreciated that. I do love what they're doing with Ahura. I'm not sure I'm completely sold on Hemmer yet, but Ahura's part in not just finding a commonality between communications and engineering, but jumping to the challenge was really fantastic. I think La'an and Ahura were the standout characters this episode.
Yeah, I agree. I really enjoyed La'an and Ahura. I also think this was like such a fun bridge like teamwork episode. I know Clyde and I share a love of the team ups whenever that's happening, and I could really feel the gelling of of Ortegas and Pike's relationship, and just like the continual side eye from Ortegas whenever Spock would say something is like probably going to kill them, and Pike's like, great, let's do it. And it felt very like all of the best parts of TOS with less of the bad parts of TOS, which I really enjoy. I love thrillers. I love submarine military style thriller movies, which is a lot of the inspiration of the original series was drawn from after like Cold War tensions. And so I felt like this was such a beautiful nod to a lot of those original inspirations to the series. And I'm also a big horror fan, and like not showing the Gorn was such classic, beautiful horror technique of just like your mind is going to make up something 10 times more terrifying than anything they're going to put on the screen. So yeah, this was so far my favorite episode that we've seen of the series. And I'm just like really excited to continue from here forward. You know, there are things as always you can knit and pick, and I hope we can discuss a lot of that stuff. And I think, but overall, this was like the momentum I wanted to see from this, and I'm really excited that we get the Gorn as sort of our big bad setup for the season.
Yeah, I love the sound effects, right?
Oh.
When Fig started talking about, and it just make this clicking sound. The way they did that was like, I felt it again, and I've seen it. So I felt it. I was like, oh my goodness. I can't imagine what someone who hasn't seen any Trek who truly does not know what a Gorn looks like in any way, shape, or form, what they're thinking. I've seen enough Trek that I have an idea of what a Gorn, and I feel like I shouldn't even say. I should just allow people to experience this on their own. But I thought the sound effects were amazing.
100%. I think the sound design, and also I've really been enjoying the music this season. There's some like really beautiful nods again to like classic Trek instrumentation, but remixed into this new identity. And like the moment when Spock hits the button to empty out the bay, that's like an old Trek sound effect. And I was just like, oh, I'm so glad they've kept like those little weird jewel buttons and like all of these things that are still like updated to the correct century of special effects, but have these like really wonderful nerdy deep dive references throughout the whole series. Let's see what's been going on in the chat here. We have Bart. Without saying it, you could totally see Pike thinking about his ultimate fate. First, when the colonists mentioned radiation, and second, when he knew he might lose people below decks. Yeah, I'm gonna put a pin in that because I definitely want to discuss the Pike knowing his future situation and what happens when that is playing a role in his decision making. Kuhn says, Pod, I'm wondering if all the acclaim for Strange New World is getting will cause them to scale back on the serialization in the other shows. I don't think so, because I think it's like each show does what it does, right? And I think that there's literally a Trek for everyone. And so you can kind of pick what your preference is. Like, do you want like a really big puzzle box drama series? You've got Discovery. Do you want Lower Decks humor where you're watching a Gorn wedding instead of Gorns dragging people through bloody trails? You've got Lower Decks. Anyway, what did y'all think?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Khalees.
I don't think it will change the serialization of the other shows. I think it's been pretty clear that this is for the people who want the episodic, whereas they're going with a lot of serialization for the others.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely think we're getting a little bit of something for everyone. I'm here for it. And I think we needed it, right? I think we needed it because when you look at particularly Disco and Picard, it's a bit of a, I don't want to, I mean, it's a lot, right? Like especially when I think about Discovery feels like when an episode 1 ends, they pick up episode 2 at the same scene, right? There's not like a continuation. It's like, a week has passed. A lot of times it feels like, I don't know, 30 seconds have passed. And so it feels like this super long movie sometimes. And it's like, okay, I got to reorient where I was. Whereas this feels like, oh, we're picking up and it's a brand new story. And a friend of mine once said, the thing that this gives us that we haven't had in a very long time is if I miss an episode, it's not the end of the world. And I think with streaming, it's hard to miss an episode, but I feel like what we're going to find is that we may pick up people in seasons 2 or 3 that don't feel like they have to go back, because I know that there are people with Disco that they watched the first season and because they fell behind in season 2, they feel like they can't jump in.
Yeah, that's a valid point. Takako says, I like how they dealt with the red shirt deaths. They are still unnamed, but Pike acknowledged their loss on screen instead of forgetting that they died earlier in the episode. 100%. I definitely want to talk about that. And Caitlin asks, I did want to ask if you think the writers sometimes have Ortega so maybe more characters say things that might not be things that would be considered appropriate for the bridge. I mean, this feels like a crew that knows each other really well. This isn't like their first voyage out together, but what do y'all think about that?
I think it's based on the captain. I think they're getting their feedback from their captain. They've been invited to dinners with him. They're a bit more relaxed. On the other bridge, I think they would behave more the way those captains want. But Ortega's responding to Pike here, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think when I look back at previous captains, right? When I think back to, particularly Picard and Janeway had a fairly formal bridge, right? Like it was very, very by the book. when I think about Cisco was a little bit more familiar, right? So when I think about Kira, felt like she could almost always say something that was borderline inappropriate, right? And we know that Bashir always was constantly saying something inappropriate. So it felt like I think you're spot on when you say, your captain kind of sets the tone. And I think when we see Pike is kind of like, hey, I want everybody to be able to speak their mind. Like, don't hold your tongue. We're in this together. And so I think Ortega's is someone who embodies that, right? Because it's not disrespectful, but she's also a bit of the voice of the viewer, right? Like, didn't you just say that this was a bad idea?
I mean, it's, you got to have that person who's willing to ask the question one more time to be like, are we sure? Like, before we do this thing that's potentially going to crush all of us in a giant wormhole in space, let's maybe check in one more time.
I dig it because I'm usually the one in that situation who goes, hey, I want to raise my hand and just, like, for the record, I think this is a bad idea. Like, I'll do it, but I feel like somebody should have said this. I'm going to be the guy. This is a bad idea. All right, let's go.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Marge says, hot freight, glad they didn't show the Gorn yet. The clicking sounds and the light signals are an effective characteristic.
Yes.
That's definitely, I think we'll start there. I wanted to ask y'all, do you think not seeing the Gorn makes them scarier at this point?
Do. I absolutely do. And again, like, because here's the deal. Like, it's interesting because from a Gorn standpoint, you've really seen them in a couple places. They've shown up in Star Trek video games because, yes, I'm a nerd, and they were in the original series. So from that standpoint, we haven't seen them in, like,
they've showed up in Lower Decks technically, and they've also in a mirror episode of Enterprise.
Okay. It feels like we haven't really seen them, and if you think about things like Discovery for the most part completely redesigned a Klingon, right? Mm-hmm. And so while we haven't seen them, it is scary because we have no idea what they're going to look like, right? We really have no idea what's going to happen here. And it's just this thing. It's kind of like a thing in the shadow. Like, I think it's terrifying, actually. So, yeah.
What about you, Keyless?
I think it adds a lot more suspense, but I think it also puts a lot of pressure on the makeup artists and the designers who are going to show us the Gorn eventually, because they have to. Like, they can't keep them in the shadows the whole time. So it's going to be very interesting what they come up with.
Yeah, I'm hoping I want this to get teased out a little bit, but I do want the reveal at some point, right? There's a reason why, like in Jaws, we eventually see the shark within the first act of the movie, right? Like, we don't only have the shadow and fin for too long. We need that reveal to sort of like move us forward. So I'm hoping we get to that point. I really enjoyed the ship design as well for the Gorn. This is the first time we are seeing kind of ships, and so they were very unique. They sort of remind me a bit of the Kelvin verse, like kind of Romulan-esque ships that we get. But yeah, I was fascinated by like the shapes that they chose.
Yeah, I want to add a couple of things. My only worry about them not showing is I feel like they waited too long to give us Spock in Discovery. Right? I feel like it got to the point where they kept talking about him, and it almost became a joke, right? Like, oh, we're never gonna see him. I felt like they held on to that too long. So I don't want them to do that here. And their track record is a wait and see. Okay. When I looked at the ship, because in my head they're massive, the Gorn they're big. The ship seems small. Like the smaller ships seem small for the fear and stature that they are in my head. That's the only thing. I thought they were cool, but I was just like, I expected the ships to be bigger.
Yeah, I mean, that big main ship was pretty large.
It was massive, yes.
The smaller ones were definitely, but like, who knows how many people are, or how many Gorns, I guess, are on the smaller ships. I did want to talk about, I mean, the main sort of backstory, right? We're sort of getting these backstories of these characters we haven't gotten backstories for before. We've had, the Una episode, and now this is the La'an episode. And we get a glimpse of sort of her terrifying childhood on this Gorn breeding planet situation. And she's having flashbacks of her brother and sort of has this intense mind meld situation with Spock, where now she also knows a secret about Spock, which I think is an interesting setup for the two of them. What did y'all think of Leon's backstory as it was sort of revealed to us this episode?
I think it was pretty heavily foreshadowed, so none of it was really unexpected. I do find it interesting that her brother found the time in there to figure out the lights when they were being hunted the entire time. So I'd really like a little bit more about him in the future, possibly even, because there has to be something really impressive going on there that he was able to figure out a whole foreign coded language while in that life or death situation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love a good backstory, especially in the first season. Because I think we're setting up the characters, and what you're doing is you're making me care about Leon. And I think her character is going to be important. Not only is she a security officer, there's this whole dynamic of her being kind of third in command, which feels a little bit odd when Spock is there, and we just kind of see Spock as the ultimate number one. So I think what they're doing is they're helping us understand why she's important, why she's significant, and I need that. And I want I want to know more about kind of the rest of the bridge crew, right? We're getting little bits and pieces. We got a little bit of piece of Mbenga. I want more. I want to know more about Chapel, right? We're pulling these threads, whether it's Hemmer. I think we know more about probably Una and Uhura than we know about anybody else. So there's some things there. And I don't even know what it is. The transporter chief who seems really squirrely and scared of everything and almost died this episode. What'd you say his name was? I need to even know his name.
Kyle, I believe.
Yeah, I think it's Kyle.
Yeah, we got we got to flesh Kyle out a little bit more, because right now, if Kyle gets caught up in a transporter accident, I'm not gonna be upset right now. So yeah, I liked it, and I like the fact that not only did we get some of her backstory, but Spock's backstory bled in. And it's making me feel like this whole Discovery thing is going to be the worst kept secret amongst a group of people, and I'm kind of for that, right? It's like we're reshaping the canon without actually trying to reshape the canon. It's kind of neat.
Yeah, I really enjoy that we got a little bit of that bonding moment between Leon and Spock. And I also think it's fun seeing young Spock in the same way that we get to see younger Ahura, and like how they're sort of developing into the iconic characters that we've come to know and love. Like, take a shot every time Spock says censor, like and then the way he's sort of figuring out how to balance all of this, and how he approaches, he's learning how he's going to approach logic as Spock, which I also find really endearing and interesting. I wanted to talk a little bit about Pike's situation, where is he leaning too much on this idea that he supposedly knows his future, right? And he can see that he lives his life to a certain point, and then something happens, and he knows when that thing happens that changes the way he has to live his life. And so when he's doing things like the Enterprise will hold, and like that's basically a suicide mission, do you think he's adding a lot of risk to his crew because he thinks he knows the ultimate like future?
I get this. Sorry.
No, go ahead. Jump in.
I get the sense that he's always been a bit of a maverick. Like, no one seems shocked that he made that order. So I think this probably lines up with his usual attitude, especially because everyone was shocked in the initial 1 or 2 episodes that he was holding back so much and he was nervous. So I think this is closer to what they see as his normal self.
Yeah, I gotta agree. I think he does seem like the right combination to me of Kirk and Picard, right? Like he's giving these incredible speeches, right? Like he's just so inspiring. Like he's so inspiring. But he's also a maverick. Like to me, if we're trying to figure out where Kirk got some of his swag and his willingness to bend the rules and do his own thing, like we're looking at his mentor right here. And so I think this is just kind of who he is. And so no, I don't think that he's playing fast and loose with everyone's life because he knows his sell by date. I think it's more or less this is kind of who he is, and this is who he was going to be regardless.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I did think this is an interesting point by Bart. I think it's also a writing mechanism to make sure that Enterprise is also a primary character in the show. And I would have to agree because, the ship is the Enterprise, is the thing that's carried us through so many Trek shows at this point that it has to have this sort of like larger than life capability than I think we would normally put on a typical ship. So I think there is something interesting there. I also saw someone, Stress VK, said the Enterprise is also a science vessel, so it should be built to explore harsher conditions than some of the Gorn ships. And I do think that's an interesting point.
Hey, Mariah, let me ask you a question because this just kind of came to me. So I was watching Better Call Saul the other day. I know this is a tangential reference, but was watching Better Call Saul. For those of you listening who don't know, Better Call Saul is a prequel to Breaking Bad. And so the thing that is fascinating to me about prequels in general is that when you bring in some key characters from the original series, they're kind of they're superheroes, right? And the fact that they won't die, right? You kind of know, they're going to be okay. Do you get a sense that with Uhura, some of that tension is lost when she's put in some of these situations because she's gonna make it, right? So when they're blowing out the main cargo bay, you're not thinking, is she gonna make it, right? You're kind of questioning, you're thinking it's too early to write him or off, but it's possible, I guess. But she's gonna be okay. And likewise, when they were on the planet, you knew she wasn't gonna pull a Sam Kirk and touch that thing and get blown to bits. But
I mean, I think that tension is there and not there for any, I would say for almost all Star Trek and almost all shows, right? Like you have your core cast, and if you're really going to get rid of someone, like that's a pretty big buildup, but nonetheless, you're going to see them have to go through some trials and tribulations as their character. So while we do know the eventual like futures for Spock and Uhura and some of these legacy characters that are in the show, I still am like fascinated by what they have to go through. And I think I was almost more invested in Pike's emotional journey because when you saw Anson Mount did an incredible job of displaying.
I'm sorry, did
you
say Handsome Mount?
I said his real name, Anson Mount, but that also works. But
it's the eyes. It's the eyes.
And the hair swoosh, that hair, like that has to have insurance on that hair swoosh. But yeah, I think it's like I am along for the emotional journey with the characters, and I try my best to forget that I know that what's going to happen to them because I want to see it actually happen to them. Does that make sense?
It does to me because I think what I'm hearing you say is you're not so much focused on the end result. You're enjoying the journey.
Yeah, 100%.
Right. And their journey. And I think for us, someone mentioned in the chat, like we get to see Uhura on these rotations. We're getting to understand how she became who she is. And that is worth watching. Like that is worth tuning into this, right? I don't know that we're getting quite that with Spock because I feel like we've gotten so much Spock over the last 50 years. We got in a last spot. This is different, and it's pretty fascinating. And I also have to agree that we don't talk about this enough. The Enterprise is a primary character. The ship is a primary character, and the evolution, or really the genesis of this character, is fascinating and important, right? And hard to do because technology has changed so much since the original series. It's like, how do you show the coolness of a ship without it being like, man, they didn't have that.
Yeah.
How you gonna have that and then not have it for Kirk, right? So
Yeah.
I also think the value of a prequel is that journey that we were talking about. That we know the end point, but we want to see them get there. Like the steps in between are what matter with them. The other characters, I mean, considering what we've seen in modern Trek with some of the characters being killed off pretty fast, they're always there. I'm sorry, I've got Discovery spoilers here, but like Commander Landry and Iram and stuff, they were taken out pretty fast. And I think that adds some of the tension in an almost artificial way, if that makes sense. Because I want to see all of their journeys and not just the ones that we know survive.
yeah, I think you're hitting it, but I think I'm feeling what you're saying. Kyle's not long for this ship, so don't get invested in Kyle. Kyle's out there. He walks around in a red shirt, man.
Character though? I'm pretty sure Kyle is Transporter Chief Kyle from the original series.
All right.
Yeah.
I think he gets to survive.
He does.
I mean, walking around in that red shirt making me nervous.
Hey, this is an equal opportunity enterprise. All shirts are up for grabs as far as it looks like.
Poor blue shirt got blown out of. That was.
I know.
Tragic.
I saw as soon as we lingered on him a little too long in the hallway walkway scenes, I was like, "Oof, this is not going to be a good episode for you."
I'm gonna be honest. Like, here's the thing: you mentioned horror, Mariah, right? So there are rules you follow. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
If you are running and you fall,
you're gone.
It's over. Like, so the minute he fell, I was like, Kyle, keep going. Like, you gotta don't get taken out with him because he fell. He broke the rules. You don't fall. And so
you fall, your shoes untied, you think you're hiding in a good place.
You hear a noise and go check it out. Don't do that stuff.
Even to like there was some really fun like little horror elements, like when La'an is looking out that port and like sees the ship coming, and then it's from the ship's perspective. Coming from the killer's perspective is such a horror thing. And so I was just like, ooh, there's like some really fun little nods here. I enjoyed it a lot.
I think Una also violated a survival rule though, because she was hiding injuries, and normally if you hide injuries, you're doomed there as well.
But luckily she's an Aurelian, so she has super strength, and luckily Omega was like, here's my blood so that you can survive. I did really enjoy a lot of the cut, like kind of the D story, if you will, about Nurse Chapel and Omega's like sort of solution to triaging without having access to different things, and like the ancient art of having to like essentially stitch people back together. I thought that was like kind of some fun nods to not only their ingenuity as like the characters, but also like seeing how they sort of dealt with that whole situation.
Well, I think Star Trek has always done this kind of tongue-in-cheek thing when they talk about medicine, and they refer to medicine that is reflective of where we are today. It always happens in some form of fashion, whether it's on a planet or something. So the whole, didn't I hear that you were interested in archaeological medicine? Like, I was like, okay, there we go. Got it out early. Episode 4. Bring it. I'm expecting at least 3 more references before the end of the season. So I thought it was fun. Like, I think this was for this to be a kind of a scary, tense space opera battle episode. It had some light moments that I enjoyed.
100%. I also wanted to talk about the concept of the kind of the Gorn as a whole, because, Leon makes that sort of speech when they're in the ready room talking about how like Starfleet believes if you can get to know your biggest villains, eventually you can figure out a way to find commonality and move forward, and create a relationship. And so I thought it was interesting that she's just like the Gorn are monsters. And even in some of the, I don't know if y'all watched like the Ready Room with Will Wheaton, but even the showrunners were talking about how the Gorn are one of the few things in Star Trek that even Gene Roddenberry put forward, that they're just pure monsters. And like the idea that there are still pure monsters in the world, and what that kind of does to this sort of idealized version of Trek, right? Like all these combinations of diversity, but there's still going to be a concept of the biggest evil, right? And what do y'all think about that placement into Trek and what it could possibly mean for the series going forward?
I mean, while Trek has humanized a lot of its villain races, we still have the Borg, and then there are the Herosian in Voyager that just hunted people for fun. There was no redemption for them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the Dominion ever really got any sort of redemption. We understood what was going on with the Vorta and the Jem'Hadar, of course, but not the Founders. So I think this is pretty traditional as far as Star Trek goes, to give us a villain that doesn't have depth. But also traditional is, introducing a villain and later giving them depth, like the Klingons and the Ferengi and stuff. So,
I mean, and technically with the spoilers, but like this latest season of Picard is like we eventually get the Borg with a heart, right? Because we have this alternate timeline of the Borg who have to figure out a way to cooperate, right?
if it's just one hive, I'm wondering if it's now like the Borgati and the OG Borg, and like there are two hives that are gonna be going on.
True.
I think if I had to guess, the Gorn is going to be the monsters for a while, but based on some things that I've seen, in Star Trek S video games and stuff like that, there'll be some understanding. I mean, one of the things I think that we love is when we see the enemy's backstory and we kind of understand a little bit more about them, so that they're not just a pure evil bad guy, right? But there's something like, okay, I kind of understand a little bit about them and they're a little bit compelling. I think we'll get a little bit about that, about the Gorn, right? Because I think that's what happened with the Klingons, right? They started off as a very like the bad guys, right? Romulans too. And as the Star Trek universe progressed, we started to understand, and I think one of the things that it does, and I'm expecting this to happen for the Gorn as well, is it challenges our perspective on other culture, right? Because I think that's what the Klingons really brought us, was this sense of like, they seem barbaric to us. And when you understand that culturally there were things in there that were very important to them and part of who they were, that it almost forced you to question, like, okay, well, why do I get to pass judgment on their culture, right? Because I don't understand it, because I don't want to drink blood wine, right? And I think similarly with the Romulans, right? And starting to understand, oh, well, there's this whole dynamic between them and the Vulcans. The Borgs are a little different. And so I think that I think the Gorn are going to be much closer to the evolution of the Klingons than, say, the Borg.
Although Kuhn makes a good point about they can't soften the Gorn too much, because we've still got them in arena acting pretty aggressively, which is true.
Yeah, I also think that there's an opportunity here. So we have to think about this in terms of the entire landscape. I wouldn't necessarily see them softening in this, but it opens the door for us to see them in Discovery and or Picard later, right? And seeing something different. Like, we're always talking about aliens that we want to see reappear in Discovery. The Gorn showing up would be fascinating.
That would be super interesting.
I also think they don't need to soften them to bring depth to them. Like they can give us cultural context and still have them be terrifying hunters of people.
That's very true. And I'll have to double check this one, but Stress VK says apparently the Gorn also destroyed all of subspace in Disco's future. So maybe they are just the nuisance of all universes.
Sure.
Which is possible. I did want to talk about Hemmer and Uhura in sort of their relationship in this episode. I think there's some really nice sort of mentor-mentee sort of happening, and they find this very beautiful mutual respect for each other, especially at the end when Hemmer is like, in my belief system, we're all here to serve a purpose. And so when you die, it's because you have served that purpose, which I think is a really beautiful way to kind of contextualize death for his character. And I think then you do see her kind of have that moment of like, well, then what is my purpose? Which is such a scary question for, of anyone of any age, let alone, a young cadet who's trying to like figure this out. What did you think about that, Keelis?
I think the mentor-mentee relationship there was really interesting. I also find the choice of Hemmer as the one there to be interesting. So if we delve a little bit into disability here,
100%.
The fact that as an Anar, he doesn't need any accessibility options, like, that's not so cool. But also, if Uhura had been the one injured instead, and he needed her help because maybe the accessibility options weren't working, if there was some way they could have collaborated more, tapping into the fact that he's blind, I would have really appreciated that. Instead, they injured his hands when he's already disabled. Like, not in his view, because he has the magical abilities that overcome it. But I think more of a collaboration where it was actually about his inherent disability would have been interesting.
Yeah, I wish they would explain more about like how the ship is more accessible, or like what they do to make it accessible for him, because it seems like there's something with the touch interface that seems to work for him, and that's like the way that it's made more accessible. So it would have been more interesting if he was just like, oh, like instead of it just being the hand, that it is like like you were saying, like the touch interface isn't working for me to be able to do this. We have to work together to figure this out, which I agree it would have been like a much more, I don't know, like accurate way to talk about some of the ways the world works for people with disabilities, right? Is like a lot of times the services that you need are not there and like you have to figure out how to make it work. So I feel like they're like taking some stabs at like trying to have some sort of weird representation in the show, but not in like it's like you're almost getting it right. You're like, you just need to flip one more page and then
it feels like it lacks strategy a little bit, which is somewhat disappointing and unusual for Star Trek, right? Because what we understand is Trek typically is saying something very deliberate about the world around us today, right? And so to your points, both of your points, what we're missing is what's your commentary? You brought in a character who is disabled. Great. We're Trekkies, so we're all for it, right? That you didn't surprise us, you didn't shock us. Like, that's cool, right? That's who we are, right? We're very inclusive. Now, what we're looking for is for you to help us understand what are you challenging us on? What is the commentary around us that we're missing, that where we go, aha, I missed this, I'm an idiot, right? I haven't seen that yet, right? All I get is, Himmer is someone who's going, I don't need your help. And I'm like, I got a buddy who tells me that all the time, right? From the time we were 8, he was like, I don't need your help. I was like, okay, right? So this is not nothing new. And so what I'm really, to your point, Mariah, tell me something about services and what happens when services go out and what that means, right? Tell me about something about how when a secondary sense that someone relies on is no longer available. Like really what that means. And what we got here was just he needed help. And so I see them going in that direction, but I'm going to push a little bit and say, give me more, give me more, challenge me. I'm ready for it.
They're almost, yeah, they're getting closer, but they're just stepping back. Like you can see engineering itself is set up to be more accessible for the actor because all the spaces are flat, even, and widely open. But nowhere else on the ship is like that. Further, he had a line in the second episode, I believe, where he was like, if I was a human, I would be disabled, but I don't need help because I'm not a human. So they're not challenging any of the commonly held current stereotypes when it comes to disabled people. They're not quite going there yet, and I don't know what's holding them back, really.
For sure. Yeah, it's like it always feels like those like 2 step forward, like 1 step back situations because you're just like, oh, this is great. We finally have like an actually disabled actor playing a disabled character and like those sort of things that are important for media representation. But it's like if you're gonna go to this point, why not take it the whole way forward and like talk? I feel like it's almost similar to like how, and I think we've seen it like on Discovery, like the representation of the LGBTQ community has gone like leaps and bounds in that series. And I think it's because they've taken the time to really listen to their performers who are actually a part of that community. It also helps that the showrunner is a part of that community, right? And so you get to see what that looks like when that community is truly like heard in how their storylines get to be portrayed. And so I'd hope that we eventually get there in Strange New Worlds too.
Yeah, so they're talking in the chat. In the chat, they're mentioning that some of his abilities are telepathic. I think in this, we need more. We need to understand Himmer a little bit more because it feels like I've walked into the middle of a conversation that I'm supposed to know some stuff about that I don't. Right? Because I think I can't imagine what this is like for a Trek newbie. Right? Because as someone who I look at myself, and when we first started this pod, I did not think that I was as entrenched into Trek nerddom as I was, but apparently I was. And so to think about having seen every series, right? To think about the fact that I'm someone who's read books, played games, like this is an area where I feel very comfortable. I'm extremely unfamiliar with Enars.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So this is not an archetype that we see a ton of. And so for us to come in and you just start talking about, well, yeah, like I need a character who knows nothing about them, and you educate me through that character. And I think that might help a little bit and set the stage as we talk about disabilities a little bit more. But right now I feel like I'm a little bit lost in understanding how he navigates this ship and does his job.
Yeah. I'm hopeful because we seem to be getting like kind of a character backstory per episode that we're eventually going to get to his. And so, I'm letting it sort of unfold as it is for now, but I do, I have higher hopes than what is normally delivered, and I'm hoping I'm not disappointed. So, we will see. I did think, because it's like truly the scenes between Hemmer and Uhura, I think, service more of Uhura's like personal journey in this particular episode, which I do enjoy because she's a cadet. She is also similar to how Ortegas on the Bridge is sort of like this audience surrogate in like taking us through different departments and learning about the ship and like figuring out all of these processes. And so I'm enjoying that part of her journey so far.
Agreed. Yeah. Again, she's like a super cadet and like a super audience member.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of need
the smartest of the audience members.
Yes. like I need a red shirt who's a little dumber for me. That's what I need. Right. I need somebody on the bridge crew that's always asking questions, and they're always explaining stuff too. Maybe not everything, but more than they are. Like,
yeah, where's Samuel Kirk?
This is happening. Yeah.
He feels like a perfect like himbo-y character to come and ask a lot of questions.
It's interesting to see what they're doing or not doing with him. Like you introduce him, then you don't see him, and then he shows up, and he's a dork. Like, and then you don't see him again. It's the biggest kind of nod to we fooled you, and name recognition doesn't mean anything, that it's hilarious to me.
I know. I
But
was
I
kind of
need more of them.
Oh yeah, I was kind of hoping he'd be that character that's always getting like knocked out on every mission, like very early on in episodes. It's just sort of like a weird recurring joke, but that might be a little too TOS slapsticky for this
Yeah.
show.
Yeah.
I could go for it happening a few more times.
At least one more time, right? It would be nice.
Mhm.
What did I'm trying to think about. Oh, I did want to circle back to, we had that hot freak earlier about how this era of Trek sort of treats the concept of like the red shirt death, right? Like getting red shirted, which I've been using as a verb lately. And how we do get more reverence from this series. I appreciated, they sort of opened with this concept of their Memorial Day, right? Where they're honoring the loss of other people who have come before them. And then they also take a moment at the very end of the episode to sort of honor those that were lost on this particular mission. And so I wanted to see what y'all thought about how they're treating, sort of these off-screen deaths of crew in this era.
So I want to say, no, I know that this will be a podcast, and so someone may be listening to this and not have context for the week that we have had. So as reference, there's been another tragedy where there's been a loss of life at a school this week. I bring that up because what this episode was done long before this happened, so it wasn't in reference to that. To your point, Mariah, for a long time, there've been books, their jokes, the red shirts, these characters dying. And what I honestly think is it's made it a little bit funny. We joke about it, right? Like I've joked about it on this podcast a few minutes ago. And it, what we do when we do that, we're very flippant about the loss of life. And it feels like this episode in particular has said, look, we're not going to be that flippant. We're not going to be that honestly disrespectful about people, characters, individuals who have a loss of life. And this is really the first time that we've seen, coffins and celebration and funeral rites for characters who we don't even know. Right? Because if you think about it, a lot of times the red shirt dies, we never hear, talk, or see them again. And this is a situation where they said, first of all, we're not gonna categorize them as that. You're not gonna be able to just look and go, okay, like you've got Leon, Una, Uhura, and random character number 4. That's the person who's not gonna make it back to the ship. They've done some nuances, and they have been very respectful about how death is handled on this show. And it's forcing me to it's challenging me around how I talk about and treat death in the Star Trek universe.
Yeah, I mean, that was really lovingly put, Clyde. I appreciate that. And I think, Keen always with the good takes. As Chippy mentioned in the watch along, apparently in our Slack, it's appropriate. This has aired right before Memorial Day. And, I don't think they always plan it, but that was definitely like if someone was looking at the calendar and said, this is where this episode goes, they definitely, they picked correctly. And Mr. Joseph 45 says they actually care about the unnamed crew members. Yeah, I think it's a nice change up. I do think we watch a lot of film and television that just like kills a lot of people all the time, and it's not always treated like it truly is a death. And so I think after a week like this week, especially here in Texas, for sure, it was I don't want to say nice, that's not the right word, but it felt appropriate to see that level of respect. Yeah, given
Considerate
to
and thoughtful.
Yeah, 100%.
I think this is the first of the live action modern Treks that's doing that. Like, Picard and Discovery, as much as I love them, have been very casual about killing people, especially about building them up a little bit in an episode just to kill them off. And so for Strange New Worlds to take this different tack, I appreciate it. It gives more value to the characters' lives. It gives more value to the stories they're telling.
Yeah, and I think there was that line exchange between Spock and Pike, where he has to make the call to close the hatches, and they lose someone, and Spock's like, you made the logical choice, and Pike's like, well, it doesn't feel like it was, and he's like, because you do value life, and that's why all of us are still here, and I think it's definitely something they've peppered into this particular episode for sure, is that understanding that this is a Trek that's treating it much differently.
Agreed.
Yeah. Well, we're almost out of time, but I did want to ask y'all one kind of final wrap-up question. And if you have other questions or comments, folks in the chat, this is now the time. Drop them in. We'll take a peek at those in a second. But what do you want the Gorn to look like if we ever get to see them? What would be your idealized sort of way that the Gorn is revealed, and what could they possibly look like?
Look, I feel like I've seen just enough. I'm expecting them to look like so I feel like when I think about it, they look like a dinosaur to me. But rather than a 1970s dinosaur, I'm expecting them to look like something out of Jurassic Park a bit. More slender than maybe bulky, a bit of a velociraptor with a humanoid characteristics. That's kind of what I'm looking at. Something that's more terrifying than comical, right? It is less Lou Ferrigno Incredible Hulk, right? And more, 2022 Velociraptor, right? Like I am legitimately afraid of that thing. Like I almost am expecting to have nightmares after we see them.
I don't know if you're familiar with Mass Effect at all, but something along the lines of the Turians, who are very avian, very kind of Velociraptor-like. Yeah.
I used to work at Electronic Arts. I'm a huge Mass Effect fan. Yes.
Yeah, I think it's somewhere like
interesting.
It's going to be interesting. Do y'all remember? I think it's an X-Men movie. There's the one who's like an alligator type character, right? Isn't there one?
Yes.
Was it like Killer Croc
yes.
or something?
Yeah.
Is that Marvel?
Oh, that might be DC.
Yeah. But yeah, they do have reptoid like characters. You guys are just bringing out all of my nerddom. Like no one's gonna want to talk to you.
Killer Croc is who I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
I'm picturing like an IRL Killer Croc is like where I think I'm going in my mind. Instead of the croc face though, like you're saying, Clyde, it's going to be that like velociraptor-y type of thing. It'll also be interesting if we get to see, because Lower Decks has introduced the Gorn before, and like we see both male and female Gorns, and like they definitely have different body shapes and body types and like all of that kind of stuff. So I think that's going to be interesting. Anyway, I always love when Lower Decks makes something canon and everyone has to deal with it. It's my favorite.
King in the chat is suggesting maybe a Krogan. And there's actually a creature in Mass Effect that's kind of a combination of Krogan and Turian. They're a brute, the enemy twisted by the Reapers. So that would be interesting. Like a thicker, more powerful reptile.
Very exciting. Well, we shall see. Next week's episode also looks fun. If y'all checked out a preview, I think we get a little more Spock backstory next up, which I think will be super fun and exciting. And we get to see some more of T'Pring, who I am excited to see more of. I don't know if y'all are, Keyless, if you're a drag person, but Jackie Cox just did a really great drag outfit based on T'Pring, and it looks really awesome on Instagram. So if that's up your alley, highly recommend it.
I'll look it up.
But yeah, I think any other final thoughts, feelings, things you wanted to chat about this particular episode?
Not for me. I'm loving it. Can't wait for more.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm really loving it. I still think they have a lot to cover as far as disability. They haven't really tried yet, and I want to see them trying since they're bringing it in so much to the forefront. But gonna see.
Yeah, 100%. Well, thank you, Kelas, for joining us tonight. We really enjoyed having you as part of the discussion and bringing your insights into this particular episode. Where can people find you on the internet?
They can find me at Taydanda Deer on Twitter. You can also find me on Patreon at Jackie Creates. I do a writing Patreon there. And yeah.
Awesome. You can find me online. I'm at Mariah Gossett. Clyde, where can people find you on the internet?
You can find me right here at Clyde Haynes.
Awesome. And you can visit StarTrekPod.co for links to our Patreon, links to find the audio and video versions of this podcast. We will see you again next Thursday night for another live episode covering Strange New Worlds. And we shall keep this trucking. But that's it for tonight, y'all. Thank you so much. Live long and prosper. Bye.